This is something that happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was around 12 years old. I just remember that one day there was some type of problem at my middle school. I think the electricity in the building went out or something, and it had to be fixed. So we got out of school for the day, and I got to stay home, but we went back the following day. However, it was really nice to have a random day off like that. My older brother was in high school, so he still had to go, and my parents both had work. So on that day that I had off, I was left home alone. I had already woken up early, as I was expecting to go to school, and after everybody left, I wasn't tired right away. So I went into the living room, sat on the couch, and just started watching TV. Probably about an hour into my unexpected day off, I heard something from outside. It sounded like footsteps of somebody right outside our house, like they were going to the front door. I looked over out the window from where I was on the couch. From there, I could see a man who was our next-door neighbor. He lived in the house just to the left of ours, and I had never talked to him or anything. But I had seen him a few times and knew who he was. I saw him go up to our front step and figured that he was going to knock on the door. I didn't feel like answering it though, and I figured that I would be no help, so I didn't plan to answer the door. He probably wanted my parents anyway. However, he did not knock on the door. I saw him walk up to the door and stand there, and then he tried to open it. I was sitting in a spot that he probably could not see me from yet, and he didn't look in my direction either. In fact, I could barely see him from where he was next to the door. But I heard him try to open it. This was pretty weird. Then I heard him walking away. At that point, I was confused, so I got up and went over to the door. I looked out, thinking I would see him walking back to his house, but no. Instead, he walked around our house like he was going to the backyard. Then I moved to a rear window, being careful not to let him see me. Our next-door neighbor then went into our backyard. He walked over to the back door of our house and then tried to open it. That one was also locked, though. I was really confused as to what he was doing. He then walked around a bit in our backyard, looking at the house. After standing there momentarily, he walked over to a window. I thought that he might try to break it or something, and I was getting really freaked out by this. He walked up to the window and appeared to look in. I ducked down so as not to be seen, even though I was at a different window. I didn't hear anything then. But when I looked back, he wasn't at the window anymore. I saw him casually walking back to his house, and then he went inside. For the rest of the time that I was home alone that day, he did not return, and I didn't see him outside or anything. Eventually, my brother got home from school, and my parents got home from work. I told them about it, and they thought it was really weird, but didn't seem to take it that seriously. They chalked it up to maybe he was just wondering if anybody was home and wanted to borrow something. They didn't believe that he actually tried to open the door, although my parents were not that close with our neighbor. They had talked to him several times and felt that he wouldn't do something like that. After that event, I'm not aware of anything else like it happening. The man moved out a few years later. I don't think he ever did anything like that again. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. And I still don't know why he did that. I'm assuming that he just didn't know that I was home and thought that the house was empty. I just don't know why he would try to break in like that. I live alone in a house that I'm currently renting, and I don't know any of the neighbors at all. It's a populated neighborhood where the yards are small and the houses are lined up in rows. Not too long after I moved in, I ordered something online to be delivered. However, I never received it, even though it said it had been delivered. Nothing was there, and I had no delivery photos from the company. So I assumed that it must have been sent to my old address by accident. If that was the case, I wouldn't have been able to get it, as that was too far away. So I decided to just order it again a few days later. When it was delivered, I didn't realize it right away. I was upstairs on the second floor of my place when I noticed something through a front window. I saw a woman exit the house directly across the street from mine. She then walked through her front yard and basically made a beeline to my front yard. She proceeded to walk right across and up to my front step. I was just standing there watching her, and I don't think she knew I was there because she never once looked at me. I thought that she was going to knock on the door, but for what reason, I did not know. She went out of my sight when she got up to the front step because I couldn't see that from my angle. But instead of knocking, I saw her come back into view seconds later, walking away and holding a package. I realized that it was my delivery, and she was walking away really fast. My neighbor had just stolen my package. I took off running out of the room and down the stairs. When I got to the front door, though, the woman was already across the street and entering her house. By the time I opened the door, she had just gone inside. I marched right over there and banged on her front door. Moments later, she answered, looking confused. She opened the door just a crack, acting defensive, and stuck her head around the corner like she was ready to slam it shut at any moment. I told her that I had just seen her take my package and that she had stolen it. The woman claimed that it was her package and that it had been delivered to my house by mistake. Not knowing 100% if my package had actually been delivered yet, I paused and thought for a moment. She got me to doubt myself for a second, but then I told her that I had just ordered something and that it was supposed to be delivered that day. She told me again that it was hers and that she knew nothing about my package. Then she said she had to go, slammed the door shut, and locked it loudly. I went back to my place and checked my email. Sure enough, it said that my package had been delivered about 30 minutes earlier, and there was no package there now. I knew she had stolen it. So I banged on the door again and told her that I knew she had taken my package. She didn't answer, though. I tried to reason with her. I yelled from the front step that if she could show me the package with her name on it, I would leave her alone. But she still didn't respond. I stood there, knocking on and off for about 10 minutes. But she refused to come to the door again. I was so mad, but I didn't want to do anything crazy. So I cooled down and then calmly walked back to my place. That's when it clicked. This explained why I didn't get my delivery the first time. She must have stolen that one too. I realized I needed to figure out how to stop this woman. I thought about calling the police, but then decided to give her one last opportunity to come clean. After all, calling the police on a neighbor can create a whole mess, and she probably wouldn't get in that much trouble for stealing a $130 package twice. So I went back to her house the following day. As expected, she didn't answer, so I left a note. It said, "I know you stole my packages. You have 48 hours to come clean before I get the cops involved. Sincerely, your neighbor." Later that day, I got a knock at my door. I thought it would be the woman, but when I opened it, it wasn't her. It was a man I had never seen before. He said he was the husband of the woman across the street. He claimed that she was terribly upset because I had accused her of stealing, and he insisted that she was innocent. He started lecturing me about making false accusations and filing false police reports. I tried to explain my evidence, which seemed clear as day, but he wouldn't listen. He stormed off, saying that if I got the police involved, he would make my life miserable, whatever that meant. I should have gone to the police right then. But instead, that encounter made me want to catch her in the act. So I went out and bought a security camera and positioned it on my front step. Then I ordered another package and purposely left it out for several days, but I had no luck. I realized she probably saw the camera, maybe even saw me installing it. The camera only covered the front step and part of the yard and driveway. It didn't reach the street or her property. So it's very possible she came over, noticed it, and backed off. I tried to hide the camera, but there weren't many good places to conceal it completely. Still, I figured that at least it would stop her from stealing in the future. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I never saw her or her husband. Eventually, I decided to just let it go, even though I was still angry. Then one night, I arrived home pretty late. For some reason, I glanced across the street. There was one light on in a front window. I saw the woman standing there, just staring at me with an angry expression. She was glaring right at me. When we made eye contact, she didn't look away. I turned and walked inside. But when I got to my front window and looked out again, she was still there, still staring at my house with that same intense, angry look. It was really creepy. She stayed like that for about 10 minutes. Then, finally, she moved away and covered her window. I figured she was just upset because she couldn't steal my packages anymore. That was the last time I saw her. I haven't seen her or her husband since then. And that was almost a year ago. As far as I know, they haven't moved. The same car is still in their driveway. But I haven't seen them at all. Honestly, that's probably a good thing. I'm also planning to move soon anyway, as I've been looking at places across town. I just hope I never see that woman again. For a little background to this story, I was a young woman at the time, living in my second apartment since graduating college. This place was a lot nicer than my first, which had been kind of a dump. So I was very excited to move into a much nicer building. This one was only a few years old and cost a lot more than my old place. I'd gotten a pretty good job the previous year though, so I was finally able to afford it. It was an apartment complex of several buildings all next to each other. My place was on the 3rd floor of the second building. I got moved in and then settled in pretty quickly. I was really enjoying living in a decent apartment building. Then, about a week or two into living there, I came home from work one day to find an envelope on my door. It was kind of shoved in the crack between the door and the frame. I figured that it was something from management, but I didn't know what. I took it and went inside. However, when I opened the envelope, there was a handwritten note inside. It said something like, "Welcome to the apartment. It's great to have you here. I hope you enjoy it. From your neighbor." When I read it, I thought that it was really nice, and I figured it was probably from one of my next door neighbors, or maybe my neighbor across the hallway. It did not say who it was from though, which I found a bit strange. Nevertheless, I was glad to live in a place with such welcoming people. Although, to that point, I had not met anybody else there yet. A couple of days later, I was leaving for work and happened to see a neighbor leaving her apartment as well. It was an older woman, and I thought that maybe she had written the note. So I said hi to her and asked, but she said that she did not. I asked her if she knew who did, but she didn't know. It was kind of a mystery. But overall, not too big of a deal. A few days after this, I got another note. Once again, I came home to find a note on my door, and when I read this one, it was an invitation to meet. The note said something like, "I'd love to have you over for some coffee to welcome you to the building." And then it gave their apartment number. Now, for some reason, I was under the impression that it was maybe an older woman, or just a woman in general. The way that it was written, the handwriting style, and all that gave me that impression. Plus, the paper that it was written on had flower designs on it. The letter also said that I could drop by any time. So, based on the fact that this person kept sending me notes, it seemed like they wanted to meet me. I wasn't sure why they hadn't just knocked on my door themselves when I was home. But anyway, one evening, I went to go say hi and introduce myself. However, it was really strange because their apartment number was not by mine at all. In fact, it wasn't even on my floor. It was located on the first floor, on the complete opposite end of the building. It was almost as far as you could possibly be from my place. So how on earth did this person even see me or know who I was and where I lived? Still, I knocked on the door. Soon after, a man answered. I was surprised to see him, as, like I said, I thought it would be a woman. He invited me inside, and I instantly got a bad vibe from him. He was sort of short and had an uneven beard. I asked him if he was the one who left the notes, and he said yes. I told him thanks, and that it was very nice, and that I had wanted to meet the person who had written them. He said that I should sit down and make myself at home, and that he would get me a drink. I said that I was on my way out, which I had made up on the spot. He seemed upset by that, and I caved and said that I would stay for just a couple of minutes. So I sat down in his place, which seemed pretty average. I was kind of curious as to why he left the notes. I asked him how long he had lived there and how he had noticed me, since my apartment was so far from his. The guy claimed that he had lived there for years and that he welcomed everyone new into the building, which made me feel a bit better. Then he asked me how I liked working at my job and mentioned the exact company that I worked for. I had no idea how he would know this information. There would be literally no way for him to know that at all. I played it off and just said that it was good, then said that I had to be going. That really creeped me out, how he knew that. The man seemed disappointed that I said I had to go, but I didn't care. I left and went back to my place. When I got back to my apartment, I hoped that I would not get any more notes and would never run into that guy again. He really gave me the creeps. About a week went by and nothing happened. I'd mostly forgotten about the whole thing. But then one night, I was at home by myself, and it was pretty late. Things were quiet, and I heard someone walking down the hallway. I thought nothing of it, as this was obviously an everyday occurrence. However, the footsteps seemed to stop right outside my door. Sure, it could have been the neighbor across the hallway, which I figured it was. But I didn't hear a door open. It was like the footsteps just stopped. So I got curious and quietly tiptoed over to the door. Then I looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw that same man standing there outside my door. He was just looking at the door like he was debating whether to knock on it or try opening it or something. It was locked, but the man did not try to open it. Instead, I saw him lean in and put his ear to the door, as if trying to listen. I kept still and literally held my breath. I didn't think he knew I was right on the other side, but I couldn't be sure. For the next minute or so, it was just the two of us, not moving or making a sound. Then finally, he backed up. A few seconds later, I saw him walk away down the hallway. I could finally relax a little bit. I considered reporting him to management, and I should have, but I didn't. I was just hoping that I would not see him again. I never went by his apartment, and I never really had a reason to either. I was also more careful all the time, but I never noticed anything suspicious. Then, after not seeing him for about a month, I ran into another neighbor and decided to bring the situation up. She knew who I was talking about and hadn't gotten any notes from him herself, but she said that she had talked to him once and that he seemed like a creep. She also said that he had actually just recently been evicted from the building for not paying his rent. That was a huge relief to me. After that, I never saw him or heard from him again. But it still creeps me out how he knew where I worked. Either he looked me up online and somehow found it out, or he must have followed me to work. Which one? I'm not sure. But I'm really hoping it wasn't the latter. Either way, I hope I never see that guy again. I live with my wife in a very quiet neighborhood. We're a little bit out in the country and have lived here for years. I know a good number of my neighbors, but not all of them. Obviously, the houses are a bit more spread out, and the yards are rather large with some woods around. Most of the properties are several acres or more. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife one night, and it was rather late. In fact, I was about to go to bed in a couple of minutes when I heard a knock at the front door. This was highly unusual, being out here in the country. Seldom do we ever get door-to-door salesmen or anything like that, especially not at 11 o'clock at night. I headed over to see who on earth could possibly be there at this hour. My wife told me not to even answer the door, but I was curious. I opened it and saw a young man standing there. I'd never seen him before in my life. He looked to be in his mid-20s and was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He said hi and then told me that he was my neighbor from down the street. He proceeded to explain that he had accidentally locked himself out of his house. Then he asked me if I wouldn't mind letting him stay at my place for the night. I told him that I would mind, and I asked why he didn't just call a locksmith, the police, or even try to get back in himself. The man claimed that he had called a locksmith, but they wouldn't be able to come until morning, and he didn't want to break anything. I asked him how he had even managed to lock himself out. I said I wasn't even sure how that was possible, since I locked my own door from the outside with a key. The guy said he didn't even know, but his keys were inside and all his doors were locked. He wasn't making much sense, and the situation was starting to feel really suspicious. As I stood there talking to him, I noticed a car parked on the side of the street a ways down, with its engine running. I asked him if it was his car and pointed toward it. He said no. He didn't know whose car it was. That was also unusual. Cars don't typically park on the side of the road out here, since the driveways are long and it's a quiet area. I told the guy that he couldn't stay at our place and that he would have to leave. He practically begged me, claiming that he had asked all the other neighbors and that I was his last hope. That didn't make sense either, since our house is more or less in the middle of the street. So why would he come to us last? I wasn't buying any of it. I told him to get a hotel, and he said he didn't have any money because his wallet was inside his house. He had an excuse for everything. Finally, I told him to get lost or I would call the cops. He gave up and said, okay. I shut the door, and the guy walked off down the driveway. I stayed by the window to watch where he would go. He walked out into the street, then went straight to the car parked on the side of the road. He got into the back seat and the car drove away. I wasn't surprised. That guy was definitely up to no good. I called the police non-emergency line and reported it. I just hope he didn't manage to trick anyone else. I never heard anything more about it, but I'm really glad I didn't let him into my house. I don't know what might have happened if I had let him stay the night like he wanted. Things like that are very unusual in our area. I probably shouldn't have even answered the door. I should have just listened to my wife. But needless to say, that guy definitely did not live in our neighborhood. I live alone in an apartment. I've lived here for approximately 2 years now. The scariest thing that ever happened during my time living here took place about 6 months in. To describe my apartment, it's an average, good place, I would say. The building is about 10 years old. Maybe it has pretty new technology, and it's overall pretty clean and well maintained. I live on the second floor of a 5-floor building, and I have lots of neighbors. However, I have never met any of them. Occasionally, I will see or hear people walking down the hallway. Sometimes I see the same people here and there, but I have never gotten to know any of them or anything like that. It's not a big deal though, as I have friends, just not any who live in the building, I guess. Anyway, one evening I got home from work like any other day. I got up to my floor and then walked down the hallway to my room. However, when I got there, I took out my key fob and held it up to the door to unlock it. But when I did, I heard the door make the locking sound instead of the unlocking sound. This meant that the door had actually been unlocked, and I had now just locked it, which gave me a bad feeling. As I realized, I must have forgotten to lock the door that morning when I left for work. I didn't know how that was possible, but I guess it was. Locking the door when I leave is just something that I do without thinking. So I couldn't say for certain if I had, in fact, locked it that morning. I walked into my place, now feeling paranoid. However, nothing seemed out of place. The lights were also all off, how I left them, so I felt better. I figured that I had just forgotten to lock the door, and that was it. I went on with my routine. I went into my bedroom and then changed out of my work clothes. Right when I was about done changing, though, I suddenly heard the front door to my apartment open, and then, moments later, it closed. I knew that someone had been in my place. I ran to my bedroom door and looked out, but I saw no one. They must have left. I went to my front door, which was now unlocked again. I looked through my peephole, but saw no one. Then I opened my door and looked out into the hallway. When I did, just barely for a second, I saw somebody entering the apartment directly next to mine. It was a ways down the hallway, and it was so fast that I could barely see them. It appeared to be a man, and he quickly went inside. The total time that I saw him was maybe half a second. I didn't recognize him, but very quickly his door shut, and he was gone. There was no one else around, so it pretty much had to be him who had been in my place. The hallway was long and straight, so there would be no other places for anybody to hide. I thought about going over there and knocking on his door, but I was too creeped out to do it. I really didn't know what to do. I went around my apartment and looked in every room. Nothing was stolen or out of place, to my knowledge at all. I came to the realization that the man must have been inside my apartment, probably hiding in the coat closet, and I had walked right past him. Another crazy thing is that when I was leaving that morning, I almost took my jacket from that coat closet. However, I told myself that the weather was warm enough to leave my jacket, and that I would be fine without it. I ended up regretting it when I was out that day, as it was colder than I thought. But if I had in fact taken my jacket, the first thing I would have done after arriving home would have been to put it in that coat closet. And then I would have come face to face with that guy. And that's the only hiding place that really makes sense as to where he was. But why was he in there? I have no idea. I still can't believe that it happened. I sent an email to management about it, and they said they would look into the matter. However, I personally never heard anything back. But maybe a month or two after the incident, I was leaving my place one day and noticed some new people moving furniture into that same apartment next door. So I guess the guy was now gone. I don't even know who he was. I had no clue what he looked like. I just simply said that I saw a man go into that apartment. So maybe he got evicted. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I still live here, and I'm always very careful to make sure that I lock the door.